Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments on bicycle travel adventures. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/357, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 357th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, it is a takeaways episode for the Space Coast Loop. So we've got the 2024 Florida trip in the rearview mirror, and so it's time, as always, as I usually do, to assess how it went. Things that I took away from it, lessons learned, the whole thing. I did ride this ride a bit differently this time, as you all heard. Was it the right call? Open question, right? Are there things that I definitely will not want to do next time? Spoiler alert, absolutely. And if you listened to the last episode, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You know, and what will I definitely want to do for sure the next time? Because I think that, as you probably are all pretty aware of right now, I do think that this is going to be, if not an annual trip, it's at least something that's a likely annual trip. And the reason is that it's just such a good set of factors for me from where I'm at the end of January or in the beginning of February any given year, in terms of availability, in terms of cost, in terms of all sorts of different things. It allows me to be able to do a trip in good weather where I don't have it, where I typically live. So I think it's something that I can safely say now, having done four or five of these? I can't even remember. I've lost track. You can tell me. I think that this is definitely something that is going to be an annual thing. And maybe it's time I stop being coy about that. I think it just will be. Because I think that one of the takeaways, as we'll talk about in a little bit here, is I think that there are other things, as I've noticed more so on this trip, that are really interesting to me beyond just the Central Florida stuff. So we'll talk about those in a little bit here. And so these are 10 takeaways, 10 thoughts, 10 musings, if you will, on things that I got out of this particular trip. And I think number one is probably a takeaway that I've had before on this trip, but I think it's worth mentioning. You know, A Brompton can do just about any kind of a tour that you throw at it. The thing that was different on this particular trip, of course, was for the first time I did camping on this trip. And one of the reasons why I hadn't before was I just wasn't sure how easy it was going to be to haul all that gear with the Brompton and deal with all of that as I have in the past. And I don't know why I felt that way. I think part of it was just many of these trips had different outcomes and different focuses or foci. I guess is foci the plural of focus? I don't know. You tell me. In any event, I've done this before with the Brompton. In fact, the very first trip that I did with the Brompton was a great big trip out to California. So clearly I've done it before. But I do think that this trip has proven, as if it needed to be proved again, that the Brompton is a really flexible bike. You've got a variety of different options in terms of how you haul your gear, how much gear you bring. The capacity on one of these things, depending on how you haul your gear, is much higher than I think most people think. It certainly surprises me every single time I do it, and I think it's just great. So I think that as a touring bicycle, Bromptons are really, really hard to beat. Are they the most efficient bikes? Are they the best bikes in terms of speed and comfort and reliability and stuff like that? Well, maybe let me set reliability aside because I do think they're reliable. No, I don't think my Brompton rides in a superior way to my other touring bike. I feel like that I can do longer distances more comfortably on the other touring bike. Maybe it's just my perception, but I do think that it certainly is faster to be on the other bike, and maybe sort of like the amount of effort that I put into the cycling is lower compared to the speed and range maybe of a larger, more traditional bike. But honestly, that may just be because I ride that bike more, and honestly, as I ride the Brompton more frequently in kind of day-to-day riding, I may be finding that thing that I just said is completely untrue and that the Brompton is actually just fine and very comparable. I do notice that there is a difference between riding the two bikes. It just seems like there's a different riding style and a different effort that goes into it, the whole thing. But the Brompton is a incredibly capable touring bike, and I love the fact that I can literally take it just about anywhere in the world, planes and trains policies willing, of course, and to check the camping gear with you. It's really flexible and really nice, and I really, really enjoy it. It has more than stood the test of time and more than made up for its higher price tag. So yay for Bromptons. All right, number 2. Resist the temptation to leave your tools at home, even for an urban tour. As I was packing, I was looking at weight as one of my factors in making decisions about what I was bringing. And I think I talked about this in the setup episode. The one thing that I would say is I look at my tool bag, and it's not that big, but it's heavy. There's just a lot of heavier tools in there. And I briefly considered, as I have done in the past, to take a much, much smaller toolkit with me. And I'm really glad I didn't. I think that there's sometimes a feeling that, I'm not going to be anywhere that I can't get help. I'm going to be someplace really where it's really easy to get help or assistance or whatever. And that's fine when you think about it in the abstract. But when you're in the moment, when I had the issue with my chain and the chain just kind of did a weird thing and hopped off the hub for reasons I'm still not clear on. And I think it may have been because it was dumb luck, plus it needed to be lubricated. It jammed itself in there pretty good. And if I didn't have my multi-tool with me, which includes like basically a needle nose plier, I wouldn't have gotten that out very easily at all. And so, yeah, I might have been in suburban Orlando at that point. There may have been, opportunities to get rides and things like that. But because I brought that toolkit as is, I was able to assist myself. And that's worth saying something. So I would say that if you're ever considering redoing your toolkit, or worse, not bringing your toolkit, I would say definitely bring something. Bring the stuff that can help you for most of the stuff that you would be dealing with. Stuff around chains and stuff around flats, I think, is a really, really important thing. I definitely learned my lesson on this trip. I was able to, in a matter of minutes, fix my problem and move along without having to call for additional assistance. And then, in some ways that kind of saved the tour right there. So, resist the temptation to leave those tools at home, even for your urban tours. All right, number 3. The best sun management for me is as follows: covering up my arms and legs and applying sunscreen to my face and neck. On this trip, I managed to do something that I haven't before on any of my Florida trips, despite the fact that it was direct sun for good, huge chunks of the day. Particularly on day 3, I was very exposed to the sun. I ended up having very little sun exposure. I did not have any sunburn or any of those kind of like really deep tans that you sometimes get in bicycle travel like this. And I think it's because I finally dialed in the sun exposure or the sun protection thing about as well as I ever have in the past. And I think that I'm just going to continue to do that. The big thing for me is covering up both arms and legs. And I've used the sun sleeve for the arms. And, I think I've just gotten used to cycling in full length pants to the extent that I can. When weather gets much warmer, well into the 80s Fahrenheit, well into the 90s Fahrenheit, that's when things are very hot. For you Celsius folks, we're talking in the 30s basically. And, at that point, I do think that you kind of have to think about shorts. But of course, they do have kind of essentially sun sleeves for legs as well. I've never tried them. It's certainly something I could consider. But, covering up is the original sunscreen. You look at desert communities and things like that. And you think about the kinds of traditional garb in those communities, very loose fitting clothing that covers everything. Yeah, that is a really smart way to approach your cycling. And I think that made my ride that much better. It also, I think, helps your energy levels a little bit. As I talked about, sun exposure can sap my energy quite a bit. And so I do think that it's a really smart idea to make sure that you're paying attention to how the sun hits you. One other thing that I'll mention that I didn't mention as part of the actual sun protection is I do think drinking a lot of water and being really hydrated is super, super smart for all of this. It is related, and what they say about hydrating is all totally true. And I managed to pull it off pretty well, I think, on this trip, considering all of the exposure that I ended up having. So sun management, cover up as much as you can where it makes sense, and use sunscreen on any exposed areas. I think this officially is file under duh, as I usually say, but it just seemed like a really important point for me on this trip. Next point, number 4, cycling gloves. They make a difference. I don't know how to describe how they make a difference, but I will say that over the course of the 4 days without any cycling gloves, I noticed that my hands were uncomfortable, and it wasn't it wasn't that I needed padding or gel or anything like that, as I've thought I've needed in the past. I found that the ergon grips on my Brompton are excellent for comfort. I don't need gloves for that. But what you need gloves for is just the friction and the movement and everything like that. They do make a big difference. And I could only find one glove as I was packing, and I thought, oh, well, I'll be fine. And I was, but I do think it does make a difference in terms of overall comfort for all sorts of things. Also, it goes back to the last point as well in terms of sun coverage, because my gloves obviously do cover at least parts of my hands as well. So I think that cycling gloves do make a difference. What you get is a very personal choice. If you do need the gel and all that other kind of stuff, the padding and all that all makes perfect sense. For me on that bike, I don't need that. I just need something to kind of be between me and the grips. And it's interesting. It was an interesting experiment, an unintentional experiment, but I'm going to make sure that before my next trip, I'm going to make sure that I either find the missing glove or buy a new pair of gloves. So maybe I'll treat myself and get myself a new set of cycling gloves, because they do matter. All right. Point number 5, I think 5. The rumors are true. Upright riding is more comfortable. I think that is true for me. I think for all of these discoveries that I have and these takeaways, you could always append for me to that. I am finding that aggressive kind of riding positions, going down with bars that force you into a downright position, have never really been super awesome for me. That's why I've used the butterfly bars rather than, the kind of traditional touring bike setup. Drop bars just never really were great. I think I retired from drop bars after I had my 10-speed stolen from Syracuse University. Thanks, by the way, for the person or persons who stole my 10-speed. The thing that I will say about the upright position is that I think there are downsides to it as well. I find that you may end up having a little bit more on the saddle sore kind of a thing. I notice stuff gets a little swampier down there, and I don't know why. It may just be the positioning of how I am in the saddle. Maybe there's things that I can do to prevent that or to ameliorate that a little bit. But I will say my neck doesn't have anywhere near the kind of stiffness at the end of the day when I'm riding in an upright style. And so I do think, as I think I've mentioned, as I look to the possibility of building a new bike, that e-bike, I think I'm going to be looking at a more upright position. I modified my main touring bike, was it last year or the year before, with a stem that raised up the handlebars a little bit. I may consider doing another round of that. I think I would probably have to redo all of my cabling as a result of that, because I don't think I have enough cable length to make that all work. But I do think that consider changing your profile with how you ride. You may find that it's the opposite. You may find that you're in an upright bike that you would be happier going into a more aggressive riding position. Whatever works for you, go for it. But for me, I would say rumors are true. Upright riding, way more comfortable, at least for me. Number 6, the backpack trick is back, baby. So the backpack trick. I had a few people ask in, I think, the YouTube videos of the past, hey, what is this backpack trick that you speak of? And the answer to that, of course, is the method that I learned from Russ Roca at The Path Less Pedaled, and how they ended up using a backpack for their gear for their Brompton touring. It's a tremendously excellent system for two reasons. Number one, of course, capacity. And I was able to bring absolutely everything that I wanted to bring. I probably could have fit a little bit more in there. Ease of transport. It became the checked bag and it worked really, really well. But most importantly, I think that it solves a couple of different logistical issues with the Brompton in touring. And number one is, of course, the sliding saddle problem. You can keep things clean and make sure that you're not getting any of your kind of fingerprint grease on the very long saddle adjustment bar that's part of the folding process, because if it gets on there, it will settle a little bit. But when you've got the backpack there, it actually ends up being a brace, which stops that, which meant that I never once had to stop and adjust that saddle. Really, really important thing, I thought. It really made for a much more comfortable ride. The second thing, and this is something that I solved on this particular trip, was a way to make it so that I figured out how to avoid the heel strike problem that I had, which had me sort of, I don't want to say abandon it, but get away from it for a little while. I was able to figure out a new system where I just used a different bungee that pulled that whole backpack back. And boy, what a difference that made. So, the two biggest problems that I typically had riding was heel strike and the sliding saddle. And both of them were fixed on this particular trip. The backpack trick is back, and I think that I'm going to be doing that again for any future travel with the Brompton, perhaps even if I don't do camping. Some of the trips that I have done have been all roofed lodging, particularly Southern California and some of the prior Florida trips. You look at that backpack and you think, oh, it's bulky and blah, 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 but it really does serve a purpose beyond just the carrying of stuff. And that's what I took away from this particular trip. So the backpack trick, it's back. All right. Number 7. Number 7. This is the thing that I'm never going to do again. And I implore you, never take US 192 to cross I-4 in either direction. It's just not safe. I, as you heard in the last episode, screwed up. I thought I was being cavalier and cool and unplanning. And I thought, oh, let me just do this route because it's a direct shot. And I remember US 192, there's plenty of sidewalks and it's super easy. The thing I forgot is I never crossed I-4 before on US 192, because when you look at a map, it's very obvious why you don't do it, because there is a series of on-ramps and off-ramps, and you are effectively on an interstate either in either direction, and there is no infrastructure, and it is really kind of scary, especially for those of you who don't like cycling in urban environments at all. It feels like you are plopped in the middle of an interstate, and it is wild for more distance than I would like to do, and more distance than I was comfortable doing. In prior trips and in the route that I originally planned, of course, I went way further south through, I believe, the Champions Gate area. It was additional mileage, of course, but it was substantially safer and actually, I think, in some ways, a little more fun. US 192 is super touristy, and you're sidewalk riding, and it's just not great. It's kind of fun for a little bit, but it certainly isn't great for getting through. It is more direct, but of course, safety is a really important thing. You just got to be paying attention to all of that. So never again, I won't be taking that route, which is kind of a shame because there was a section using a trail that I'm going to be mentioning in a little bit here that was new to me. And I only took that, I think, because I took that US 192 route. That is a terrible, terrible idea. So I'm glad I did it in some ways. I'm glad I'm able to say, hey guys, don't do this. But at the same time, never again. And it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. And I don't think it came across very well because the non-fun parts were not part of the recording. And you just heard me casually saying, oh, what a terrible idea. But it was a really bad idea. I cannot underscore it enough. Do not do it. Just don't. If you look at my day 4 route, don't. Just don't. If you ever see my heat map for it, don't. It's just not a good idea. Number 8. Cycling into Walt Disney World is kind of fun, and I think I'm going to keep doing it. I've been almost apologetic for biking into Disney World, but I kind of like doing it. Is it the best biking in the world? Absolutely not. It's actually it's kind of dumb in some ways. But for whatever reason, I kind of like the fact that, I'm going into a place where virtually no one bikes. And I've come up with a couple of different and interesting routes to get in there. There is infrastructure that gets you right to the doorstep of it. And then there's not unreasonable infrastructure, except when there isn't, for getting to certain resorts. And so, I don't know, it feels a little bit like, I don't know, the bicycling equivalent of stealth camping, if that makes any sense. It's sort of like you're cycling in a place, you can do it, you're not supposed to be there, but you're definitely not supposed to be there at the same time. So that's why I kind of like it. And of course, I'm a Disney fan, so I like going there. So I think I'm going to keep doing it. I'm going to stop being apologetic about it. But obviously, I'm not going to foist my Disney stuff upon all of you unless there's massive desire to hear more about it. But, to the extent that I do any more of these trips that involve Disney World, I think, or at least if I'm in the area, I think I'm always going to end up having some component to it, just because it does feel a little bit like I said, the stealth camping equivalent of cycling. And that's kind of fun. I also feel the same way about cycling in and out of airports. But now more and more, the infrastructure is actually there. You're meant to be there. So it's not maybe quite as exhilarating. I don't know. Maybe it's just the sense of adventure that I get from all of it. But, again, there's a difference between doing stuff that's reckless and unsafe, like riding on US 182 across I-4 and cycling in some places within the Walt Disney World property. I mean, they're like that. It would be very equivalent to that, very interstatey. But I found places that aren't like that. And so it's kind of cool to discover all of that. All right, number 9. Central Florida is constantly evolving. Some of the trails that I ended up on randomly are just delightful. And the evolution of the building in Central Florida has its good and has its bad. I'll start with the bad, of course. The bad is that sometimes, some of my routes have gotten closed off. But the good news is the replacement for that has often been better. And we just got done talking about bicycling to the doorstep of Disney World. The original route that I had was going through an area that ended up being developed, and they closed off that road and they gated it off. Well, guess what they did? They built a new one with an awesome bike lane. So, that part is pretty good. I am noticing that some of the infrastructure that's going in is bicycle friendly, and that's great. But also they are building multi-use trails like the Shingle Creek Trail. That was opened last year, I am told, by listener Fernando. Fernando, thank you for chiming in and letting me know all about that. What a beautiful trail it was, kind of through a mossy, cool Florida kind of forest, for lack of a better way of putting it. And you would miss it completely if you're a tourist in the area. And I sort of stumbled upon it because of the route that I ended up choosing. So I think that the evolution and the building and the development of all of Central Florida has its pros and its cons. And I'm grateful that although Florida has a bad reputation for cycling, I think that is it's not true. I think that any of you who cycle in Florida know all about all of these great trails that are developing, and they're really networking them together. And frankly, that's going to get to my last point here, transition, as we say in the biz, to the 10th point. The Florida Coast to Coast Trail is absolutely A+. I have not cycled every inch of it. I have cycled a good chunk of it. But it has not only made me intrigued and interested in potentially finally kind of linking together the last pieces of it that I haven't done on the western side of the state, but I'm really intrigued with the other trails that actually network into the Florida Coast to Coast Trail, including the Heart of Florida Trail and the St. Johns River to Sea Loop. Both of those look really, really intriguing. And I think that as my final point here, the 10th point, I think it's worth maybe even previewing what I'm considering doing for next year. I think it's any of the above. Certainly, doing a Tampa to Titusville ride where I do the entire trail, the entire coast to coast trail, certainly is up there and something that I would want to consider. I'm not a completist, but sometimes I am, and it would be kind of neat to see that western side of the trail. I also understand it. It might have been Fernando, the listener who I referred to earlier. It might have been another listener was saying that there's more and more development of that west side of the trail. Florida Route 50 is a chunk of road route that you have to do, and many riders don't care for that part at all. Apparently, they're improving that. They're adding new infrastructure to that area, some of it on road, some of it off road. So every year it gets better and better. So that is certainly an option. And in many ways, that's the default that I would consider doing. But the other thing that's really interesting are those other trails, because particularly the St. John's River to Sea Loop ends up taking you all the way up the east coast of the state of Florida, which gets you up to St. Augustine. If you are in St. Augustine, you are a stone's throw away from Jacksonville and another easy to fly in and out of airport, which is really, really intriguing. So, depending on the nature of how much time I would have, how long of a trip I would want to take, what else I would want to do in addition to the cycling, i.e. would I want to go to Disney World for any part of it? There is a bigger trip that could be done in that kind of time frame where the beginning and end of the trip could be conceivably Jacksonville and Tampa, could be Orlando and Jacksonville. There's all sorts of different iterations to this trip, but the fullest way to look at that potential trip could be from, I think it would make the most sense to start in Tampa and ride east, ride from Tampa across using the C2C trail or using my modified route, which I've done in the past, rehook up with the C2C trail or stay on it and go north of Orlando. And of course, the trip that I just did this year. And then hook up with the other trail, with the St. John's River to Sea Loop, go all the way up to St. Augustine, and then kind of roll your own kind of trip all the way up to Jacksonville, into the Jacksonville airport. Interesting. There's certainly a trip that can be made out of all of that. So suffice to say, there's going to be a preview episode probably sometime in January of 2025 where I'm going to be talking about what I'm doing. I have a funny feeling that you're going to be hearing some or all of these trails as a part of what that preview is going to look like. And it's all just going to be a question of, okay, what are the camping opportunities? What do I want to do? Do I want to camp? Do I want to do roof lodging? I really enjoyed a lot of the camping. I would really like to do more of it. And I think that a future trip would probably integrate in as much camping as I possibly could, just to keep costs down and adventure up, as I like to say. And of course, also, mixing in roof lodging is always great with any kind of tour, because it just gives you the opportunity to do all sorts of things that roof lodging affords you: recharging, sleeping in a bed, the usuals. So I do like to kind of do these hybrid trips, and certainly the Brompton plus the backpack trick allows me to have all the gear that I would need for the camping parts of it, but also the flexibility to be able to get in hotel rooms all that much easier too. So a lot more to come. I'm really excited about doing more of these Florida trails. I was really excited that this Space Coast Loop worked out as well as it did this year. Super happy that the camping worked out. I checked a lot of boxes in terms of goals on this trip. You heard I ended up doing a little bit of local food on the front end of the trip. It didn't work out so much on the back end. I was able to do the ratings. I gave some 44 stars. That deli was really quite good. It was a really fun trip, and exactly the type of travel that I'm hoping to be able to do more of this year and bring to you. So thank you so much for coming along for the ride. We've got so many great adventures coming up. A little preview, I won't say where, but I've got my next trip already planned and infrastructure for that trip, extra transportation already in the books. So lots of good stuff that's going to be coming up this spring and beyond. So thanks so much for joining, and more adventures to come.
And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options if you're not into the small monthly thing. Check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Bettinati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Grotke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullum, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Lazewski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponsello, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, Sam Scruggs, Dwight Pintinger, Connie Bowder, Rob Merrifield, and thanks to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.